Section 1.1, Patterns in Division. Today we're going to look at the different patterns that come up when we're using our divisibility rules. Most numbers, at least the numbers 1 to 10, have a divisibility rule, and if a certain number follows that divisibility rule, then a number is divisible by that smaller number. And that sounds a little confusing, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to use a demonstration here. I have 3 different colored circles: red, blue, and yellow. Anywhere I place a red circle, that number is divisible by 2. Anywhere I was to place a blue circle would be divisible by 5. And anywhere I place a yellow circle would be divisible by 10. So let's start with the yellows. We're going to start with, we're going to start with red. We'll start with 2's. So 2 is obviously divisible by 2, as is 4 and 6 and 8 and 10. And we'll look at some, basically any number that is an even number is divisible by 2. 11 is not divisible by 2, it's an odd number, so it isn't divisible by 2, but 12 is an even number, so it's divisible by 2, as is 14 and 16, and you'll continue to see a pattern. If 26 is, 36 is, any even number, any number that ends in a 2, 4, 6, 8, or 0. I can continue on here, but what I'm going to do is, just to make it a little bit quicker, is I'm going to show, if you carry on down the list, all of those numbers are divisible by 2. All of them that end in a 2, 4, 6, 8, or 0 are divisible by 2. And then numbers that are divisible by 5, well, 5 is divisible by 5. 1 5 is 5. 2 5s are 10. 3 5s are 15. 20, 25, 30, and you'll start to get the point here that all the numbers that end in a 5 or a 0 are divisible by 5. And all the numbers that are divisible by, all the numbers that end in a 0 are divisible by 5. If you think about it, 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times 4 is 20. If you add by 5s, the number has to end in a 5 or a 0. Any number that ends in a 5 or a 0 is divisible by 5. And then when we go to our 10s, you'll see that 10 is divisible by 10, so is 20 and 30 and 40 and 50. So any number that ends in a 0 is divisible by 10. 74 ends in a 4, so it's not divisible by 10. Even if you count by 10s, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, all those numbers end in 0, so they're divisible by 10. If a number does not have a 0 in the ones column, it is not divisible by 10. 1,254,650 is divisible by 10 because it ends in a 0. We're going to move over and we're going to look at 4s. So the divisibility, we're going to jump back. The divisibility rule for 2 is any number that ends in an even number or an even digit is divisible by 2. 84 ends in a 4, so it's divisible by 2. 74 ends in a 4, so it's divisible by 2. 56 ends in a 6, making it an even number. It's divisible by 2. Any number that ends in a 5 or a 0 is divisible by 5. So 5, 15, 25, 35 all end in 5. They're divisible by 5. 30, 40, 50 all end in a 0, so they're divisible by 5. And any number that the divisibility rule for 10 is any number that ends in a 0 is divisible by 10. Patterns in division, we're going to look at 4. 4 is a little bit different. 4, you have to take the last 2 digits of a number, and those last 2 digits have to be divisible by 4. So to start off basic, if you look at 404, the last 2 digits are the 0 and the 4. Well, 4 goes into 4, so 4 goes into 404. 4 goes into 0 and 8. 4 goes into 12 in the 412. Then you look over at 414. Well, does 4 go into 14? Not evenly, so it doesn't go in there. But 4 goes into 16, so 4 goes into 416. 4 goes into 20, so 4 goes into 420. And you'll start to see a pattern emerging in these numbers. 424, 4 goes into 24. 28, 4 goes into 428 because it goes into 28. 431. Does 4 go into 31? No, it doesn't. But 4 goes into 32, so it goes into 432. And 436. You'll probably start to notice a pattern here that it skips every other row, but these are all falling in the same area. If you look at 440, you take the last two digits, which is 40. 4 goes into 40, so 4 goes into 440. Math is all about patterns, so the divisibility rule for 4 is that if 4 goes into the last two digits of a number, it goes into the whole number. Now 8 is the same as 4. It's got the same idea as 4, but we're looking at the last three numbers of a number, the last three digits of a number. The trick for 8 is that we just make sure that those three digits are what we're looking at. So 5,128. You don't need the 5 in there. You're only looking at the last three numbers. So I would take 128 and divide it by 8. Now I know that 8 goes into 12 once, and then I can take that 8 away from here, and that will give me 4. And then I can bring down that 8, and 4 goes into, oh, stupid pen. Sorry, 8 goes into 12 once, and then I can subtract that 8. That'll give me 4, and then I bring down my 8. 4 goes into 48 6 times, and then I can subtract my 48. And I shouldn't have a remainder down here. I don't. It is 0. So 8 goes into 128 16 times. If 8 goes into 128, then 8 goes into 5,128. And that will work for any number, anytime. So, what have we learned from this? We're on the way to learning the divisibility rules, and so far we know that a number is divisible by 2 if it's an even number, which means it ends in a 0, 2, 4, 6, or 8. So it doesn't matter how big it is. It could be a 15-digit number, but if it ends in a 0, a 2, a 4, a 6, or an 8, it is divisible by 2. A number is divisible by 5 if it ends in a 0 or a 5. So 105 is divisible by 5 because it ends in a 5. 107 doesn't end in a 0 or a 5, so it can't be divisible by 5. A number is divisible by 10 if it ends in a 0. Any number, the last digit is, if it's a 0, is divisible by 10. A number is divisible by 4 if its last two digits are divisible by 4. So the example for that, 344 is divisible by 4 because the last two digits, 44, are divisible by 44. It also has to be an even number for 4. So the example, if I went back over to this chart, 465, 4 doesn't go into 65, so it wouldn't go into 465. But 4 goes into 36, so it would go into 436. And the same rule applies to an 8. A number is divisible by 8 if its last three digits are divisible by 8. So the example here is 1,272. If I take the 272, the last three digits, and I divide it by 8, 8 does go in evenly to 272. So it would go in evenly to 1,272. It also has to be an even number. Because 2 times 4 is 8, or that 2 and 4 are factors of 8, if 8 goes into a number, so do 2 and 4. So if a number is divisible by 8, it's automatically divisible by 4 and 2, because they're both factors of 8. But the flip side of that, if 2 and 4 go into a number, then 8 doesn't automatically go in. So for instance, if I have 16, 8 goes into 16. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 goes in, so 4 and 2 go in. But 12, both 2 and 4 go into 12, but 8 doesn't. So if the bigger number goes in, the smaller factors will, but it's not necessarily the same the other way. You've probably seen a Venn diagram before. A Venn diagram helps you to split up numbers. It also helps you to split up ideas. We're going to use it for numbers in this case. We're going to look at a Venn diagram. This area over on the left is where numbers that are divisible only by 2 go. The right side is only where numbers that are only divisible by 5 go. And any numbers that are divisible by both would go here in the middle. So for instance, 268 is not divisible by 5 because it doesn't end in a 5 or a 0, but it is an even number, so it's automatically divisible by 2. 10 ends in a 0, which means it's divisible by 5, and it's an even number, which means it's divisible by 2, so it would go in the middle because 2 and 5 go into 10. 395, it's not an even number, so it can't be divisible by 2, but it ends in a 5, so it's divisible by 5. 57 is not an even number, and it does not end in a 5 or a 0. So it's not divisible by either one. So it would go in up here. As with 7, it's not divisible by either as well. So what I'd like you to do is try this question for your practice. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 numbers. I'd like you to draw a Venn diagram, one side divisible by 5, one side divisible by 8, and I'd like you to divide those numbers in.